Nige, come on. Nelly belly. Hello, welcome to Gardener's World on a lovely May day. And one of the interesting things about this year is that it's been so late and so cold that things have been delayed and concertinaed together. So most of the blossom here in the orchard has arrived all together. So there's a real chance that all these trees will pollinate each other and we should get a really good apple crop. Now, I won't be doing anything with the apples today, but I will be working in the grass borders, moving grasses around now they're growing. I'm also replacing the pots in the jewel garden and going from phormiums to fuchsias. This week, Carol continues her series on selecting the right plant for the right place. She's off to the Yorkshire Dales to see plants that thrive in exposed and tricky situations.
It's a little encrusted saxifrage. Did you ever see a better example of a right plant in the right place?
And Zephaniah Linder goes to South Wales to see the national collection of Primula auriculas.
Oh, wow. They're amazing, Pat.
Yeah.
Look at
You like
those.
that?
Look at the colours. They're stunning.
At last, here at Longmeadow anyway, we're getting some warmer weather coupled with wet, which means everything is growing. But grasses are always one of the last things to get going in spring. And it's really important that you don't move them or divide them in any way until they're growing strongly. What I want to move are the pheasant grass. Now, pheasant grass for years has been known as Stipa arundinacea, but it has had its name changed to Anamanthini lesoniana. But horticulturally, it behaves exactly like all the Stipas. So these here, this little growth, had seeded themselves last year. They're a lovely plant. I want them, but not here. So I'm going to move them. Now, they've got fairly shallow roots. So if I just get the spade in and ease them out, there we go. I can hear the roots going. That is a very healthy young plant that I can transplant. There you go. That's another nice one. See, that's a cracker. And that's a seedling from last year. And while it's up here, I'll just weed it a little bit. I'm going to place these before I plant any. So let's take a decent-sized chunk. Now, these ones here are clearly on the way out, and they won't be here next year. I think I'm going to plant one close to them, essentially to replace them. That, right, just pop that there for the moment. There's a gap in there. How about that? What I've got to bear in mind is that these don't get much bigger. And I don't want them to be completely swamped. And I just need to dig a shallow hole, but a little bit deeper than I need because I want to put some grit in underneath it. And you can't really overdo the drainage when you're dealing with steepers of any kind. They do like it. And also full sun, of course. There we go. Put some soil back in around it. And hopefully that will hardly know it's moved. Oh, look, he's a frog. A little frog. You see? Hadn't expected that. It's so exciting to feel the whole garden is being used by all kinds of creatures. But it's their garden as much as ours. The cottage garden is awash with blue. It's a froth of blue, floating and shimmering above all else. And of course, this comes from the forget-me-nots, the myosotis. They seed themselves everywhere. And at their peak, they dominate the garden without in any way overwhelming it. They have this lovely light touch. And they will die back, and they will seed themselves everywhere. So be ruthless if you've got it. I'd say 3/4 of all our forget-me-not plants go onto the compost heap. What's left is enough to spread for next year, and you can get the seedlings and replant them. Now, last week, Carol looked at plants that find places in awkward corners and will seed themselves, and she said, you know, they'll be happy if they do that. This week, she's gone to North Yorkshire, to Parsifal Hall, where she looks at plants that have adapted to thrive in exposed and demanding conditions.
For any plant to thrive and flourish in our gardens, it needs the right conditions. A happy plant is the right plant, grown in the right place. Here in the Yorkshire Dales, we're looking at plants and how they cope out in the wild. They can give us a clue as to the type of plants we can grow in our own gardens, with exposed areas where there's nothing between them and the elements. The great majority of the plants around here are ground hugging. And of course it's no accident, because if you're sticking up in this kind of wind, you get blown to bits. In the case of this dainty little saxifrage, it's got tiny, fine leaves. And the more slender the leaves are, the less it's going to transpire, the less moisture it's going to lose. And it needs to hang on to every drop because there's not a lot of it about. Its flowers point upwards. That's to ensure that any pollinating insects that are getting whizzed by the wind see it, home in on it and pollinate it. Welcome to Windy Corner. Just look at my hair. You can tell what it's like here and what these plants have to put up with. And when they're a little taller, like this grass, then they allow the wind just to pass through them. But here's one little plant that does something quite different. This is a fern. It's a Splenium trichomanes, the maidenhair spleenwort, and it's got nothing in common with all those big, gorgeous, soft ferns you find in woodland. And it's actually really stiff. These stems stand up for themselves. And the pinnae, the tiny little leaflets all the way up it, are really minute and they're hard, almost sort of brittle. It finds its home in these cracks and crevices, and it stands up there, not just in the wind in the summer, but right the way through the winter. And you could grow this little fern at home, and of course it'll put up with any amount of exposure. If these plants are happy growing here, then we should be able to grow plants with similar characteristics in exposed areas in our gardens. Here at Parsifal Hall is this glorious courtyard garden. Up there is Rhodiola rosea, roseroot. It's got succulent leaves, and each one of those leaves acts as a tiny reservoir for when droughty conditions persist. It's very easy to propagate. You can just snap a piece off, take the bottom leaves off and shove it in some gritty compost. It'll take root as easy as pie. This is Ibis sempervirens, otherwise known to most of us gardeners as candytuft. It's a sprawling plant from the mountainsides of southern Europe, and it makes these great big mats that cover the rocks. As it's doing so, it keeps the back of the plant cool, but it also allows these flowers to open. They're composite flowers, they're made up of lots of little flowers. It's got tough, leathery leaves, and it's evergreen too. And just here on this corner, I nearly sat on it, which is just as well because it's a true cushion plant. It's a little encrusted saxifrage. Did you ever see a better example of a right plant in the right place? There are so many plants we can choose from when it comes to the exposed areas in our own gardens. The rock rose, Helianthemum mummularia, is a native plant that occurs all over the British Isles. It's been widely hybridised and is available in a kaleidoscope of colours. At the end of the season, it's a good idea to trim it back. Mossy saxifrages are easy to grow and they thrive even in dappled shade. There are numerous cultivars with jewel-like flowers that adorn our gardens. The up on the hillside there were hawthorns and other trees shaped by the wind. And I think it's such a lovely idea to have a shrub or two in amongst these low-growing plants. This is Salix boydii. It's a willow. It's as soft as can be. And both the top and the underside of the leaves are coated in tiny hairs, which means that the cuticle of the leaf is protected from hot sun. It's also got this glorious habit. Its branches move around and allow the wind to pass through it. Easy to grow, and it'll last for years and years. I think it's just gorgeous. And in common with all these plants here, they're all the right plants for the right place.
If you want to visit Parsifal Hall, it is open all summer. Now, as I was walking down, Nellie was walking off with one of the supports for these fuchsias. Now, can I have my stick back, please? Nellie, come on, bring it here. There's a good girl. Thank you very much indeed. Now, I need it. I brought the fuchsias in to replace the phormiums and to give us fresh summer display in the 4 large pots here in the centre of the door garden. And I'm going to try a new combination this year, although these fuchsias are not new plants. Planted these 3 years ago. They've been here in the door garden. I've had them in the cottage garden, so I'm recycling them. But before I can do that, I need to take out the phormiums. Right. Oh, there we go. Come on, you. There we are. So that's the plant. And what I'm going to do is put it in a bag which acts as a pot. Now, never plant into old compost if you want the best of plants. The nutrients are used up. To give the best opportunity for the best display, you need fresh compost. So I'm going to at least half empty that and put some new in. But I am going to use it to keep this happy for the next few weeks until I find the right place for it. This can be put to one side until I'm ready to give it a new home, and that will be completely happy. And this can be planted out. Now, this is fuchsia called Voodoo. This has been growing in the greenhouse all winter. Now, that's about the right sort of depth to put it. And of course, the first fuchsias had very small flowers. And it really wasn't until the 1920s and 30s, when American hybrids came in, you got these large flowering hybrids. And now, of course, there are hundreds of different fuchsias you can grow. Okay, let's take this out. There we are, lovely. And I'm going to put a stronger support in here because I've learnt the hard way that these need good support. It's hit the drainage at the bottom. So if I put that in there like that, right, temporarily we'll just tie that in so it's reasonably upright. Does that look upright to you? And I'll do a proper tie later. Now I'm just going to loosen the soil off around the edge and add in some fresh compost, which is based much more around leaf mould. Fuchsias like a nice loose root run, and yet which holds some moisture, and I've prepared some here. So this is a mixture, 50% our normal potting compost and 50% sieved leaf mould. And that should provide fuchsia heaven for the rest of this summer. But what I'm trying this year is an experiment. I'm adding in a grass, and this is Imperata cylindrica rubra, blood grass. And as it grows, you have these blood red tips. And of course, the idea is to pick up the colours of the fuchsia and around it form a kind of fringe of grass. They're happiest with really good drainage. And I'm going to put 4 per pot. And I might well add something else in there later, but I'm not quite sure what. These will grow and get denser but for the moment, we'll leave that in place. Now, I love auriculas, but have always grown them in pots, not particularly successfully, and admire those that do and have those extraordinary auricular theatres. But Zephaniah Lindo has been to Wales to meet someone who's passionate about auriculas and also considers different ways of growing them.
I'm a lecturer in horticulture, so my job is teaching others, but I'm always keen to learn new things too.
I've been growing plants now for a number of years, and one of my absolute favourites is the Primula auricula. They had such a splash of colour in the garden, and at this time of year, they're at the absolute peak.
This would have to be anywhere but my garden, though. I've had limited success with auriculas, so I've come for some advice from Fushia. She's the holder of the Plant Heritage National Collection of border auricula.
I really do need a little bit of assistance here to get my reputation back in as a horticulturalist. These do sometimes have a bit of a reputation for being a bit tricky or a bit difficult to grow. What's your experience with these?
The ones that you see here are the garden or border auriculas. They're growing in a little raised bed. They like free draining material, grit to allow that drainage.
Okay.
I don't need to look after them other than do a slug count now and again. They don't mind cold, they don't mind sun, as long as they're not sitting in it all day. Where did you grow them?
I was growing them in pots and containers.
Right. If you're growing them in pots, they need a little bit of extra care.
Germinating them is pretty straightforward. It's when they're potted on that things start to get particular. Every auricula grower has their own recipe, and Pat is no exception. Although some ancient concoctions were rather more eccentric.
There was a very famous recipe using bull's blood and baker's sugar scum, goose dung, yellow soil they used to gather from the fields, mix it all together, and it was a weird concoction, and it apparently did grow very good auriculas.
And it had a certain fragrance as well, I should imagine.
Oh my, yes, I'm sure, yes. I generally use an ordinary multi-purpose compost. So I use ordinary compost. A John Innes #2, equal amounts, and some grit.
Equal amounts of all?
Yes, 1, 1 and 1.
And that's it? As simple as that?
I have a secret ingredient.
Ah, here we go. There's always a secret ingredient.
As you know, there's a big secret to growing auriculas.
Go on then.
And I can pop that in now if you turn away, please.
OK, I'll turn away.
So...
Have you done it?
I've done it,
okay.
Yes.
With the secret ingredient in, everything is given a good mix.
This is probably why my ones didn't work.
You didn't have a secret recipe,
I didn't
did
have
you?
the secret ingredient as well.
No.
Yeah.
What you've got to remember is they are alpine plants, so they will need to stay cool. And of course, putting them in a pot will make the roots warm up quicker than they would in the soil. So I have areas around the garden where they are out of sun, they're north-facing, and also they get plenty of air and plenty of light. This is the main pavilion where we keep all the auriculas.
Oh, wow. They're amazing, Pat.
Yeah?
Look at
You like
those.
that?
Look at the colours. They're stunning.
Oh, this is what I love about them. There are so many varieties. And of course, the beauty of the bees crossing them is you never know what you're going to get because they don't come true to seed. But if you want to breed your own, you crossbreed, you hand-pollinate your own, and you develop your own plant, which is lovely. And when the seed is sown and when they come into into maturity and give you that first flower, and you don't know what you're going to get.
This one's interesting.
This is one of mine, and this is called Patty's Girl.
So how did you come up with that name for that, then?
Well, we all give them a greenhouse name. We know what we'd like to call it. But that has to go on a show bench.
OK.
And the judges will look across the bench, and if that plant gets a first, second or third, you then name it, and then that becomes its name in a classified directory of names of auriculas. But somebody calls their plants all names of stations and underground stations in London.
Right.
I have one here which is known as Trim the Velvet, bred by Cheryl down in Cornwall, and she said it reminds her of pinking shears that cut around purple velvet cloth.
You can see where it gets its name,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. They're so amazing, and they're an absolute wonderful plant to play with.
You know what? It's made me think that I should give it another go
Yeah.
and really try and give it the attention it so deserves, because if I can come out with the results half as good as this, I will be extremely pleased.
Thank you.
And in case you're wondering, the secret of Pat's success is good old-fashioned fish, blood and bone.
The coppice here is full of primroses in March and early April, but I've never thought of growing auriculas, which after all branch of the primula family, in anything but a pot. So maybe it's time to try them in a board or two. Last week, I started planting up the mound, ready to create a scented garden. And I'm going to put in, behind the lavender hedge that I planted last autumn, some irises. Now, irises do have scent, or at least some do, but that's not really what they're doing. These are there because this is a perfect opportunity to grow them where they like to grow best. I love them, they're great, but they need conditions that are very hard for me to give them. Irises love full sun and really good drainage. And between the pears and the lavender is the perfect place for irises. Now, you can see I put down some grit to improve the drainage. So I'm just working that very lightly in so that they won't sit in water. Okay. This is an iris called Belle Azur. And as the name suggests, it's blue, a pale blue. Now, in the pot, they're slightly buried. But if I take it out of the pot, like that, you can see, if I move the compost away a little bit, that there is the rhizome. Looks like a ginger. And for this to produce flowers next year, it must bake. That's absolutely critical when you're growing irises. This must have a summer of as much heat and direct sunlight as we can possibly give it. And it follows from that, it must be above the soil. So, if I make a hole to plant it in, so that's about the right height. And if in doubt, make it higher rather than lower. And you can see that I've got the rhizomes pointing at the sun. We don't want them hidden by the foliage of the iris itself. And then we can pull the grit back round it, and that's fine. And if you can get that right with good drainage, irises are easy. They're really easy to grow, and they will perform and produce these beautiful, spectacular plants. Right, now to plant the roses. I've got 3 roses for this top scented area. They're all albas, and albas all tend to have fabulous scent. They're old roses, they're tough, they have slightly bluey-grey foliage. They're easy to grow. They grow in almost any soil, in any condition. And they do have fabulous fragrance. So it's a no-brainer, really. They've got to be part of the garden. Whatever rose you're planting, I think there's one thing you need to bear in mind, and it is the exact opposite of planting the irises. Because you do want to give roses a bit of depth. Now, this is the pot, and you can see that's quite deep, and that's on purpose. Because roses are grown on a graft. So in other words, the roots belong to one rose, and the top section another. Before I plant it, I want to add a little of mycorrhizal fungi, which is mixed up into charcoal. This is biochar. And you can buy this with the fungi already in it, and I'm just going to sprinkle it on the bottom of the hole like that. That goes in there. It's important to have the point where the graft meets the top section buried below the soil level. It doesn't matter what rose you're planting. Bury it slightly deeper than it is in the pot, so that the various stems appear as though they're growing from the ground rather than from a central graft. Right, we've planted that like that. It's nice and deep. With all roses, give them a really generous soak when you plant them. So that's Rosa alba semiplena. One of the very best roses for wonderful fragrance, beautiful white flowers, and tough. Will grow for almost everybody, almost anywhere. But if you're not planning on growing roses this weekend, here's some other things you can be doing. The weather is warming up and aquatic plants are starting to grow vigorously, but so too is algae. So it's important to regularly skim this off your pond. Don't get rid of this completely, but put it on the side of the water and let tadpoles, frogs, beetles and newts crawl back into the water. And after a couple of days, then you can add it to the compost heap. If you've sown cabbages or any other brassicas from seed, plant them out as soon as there is a decent root ball with roots showing clearly on the outside of the potting compost. Plant them deeper than they were in the pot and firm them in really well so there's a good anchor to hold a full-grown cabbage or cauliflower head. Water them in and leave them to grow. Broad beans need supporting now, not as individual plants, but by wrapping twine or strong string between canes or sticks spaced out along the row. Keep the string taut, and that will hold the growing beans upright and make them easier to pick, as well as stopping them flopping all over the place. And as the broad beans grow, you just add extra layers of string so that they're not individually supported, but they don't flop, and you can get at them to pick them. Now, it has been cold and the vegetable garden has been late, but it's happening, it's coming. My radishes are starting to grow. I haven't picked any yet, so this is a first. I think that the real good thing about growing your own is that suddenly you feel food is something that is elemental and personal. There's that deep satisfaction. And you have some radish, and maybe just pick some rocket, which I've got growing around the potatoes here. No, come here. Well, that rocket, radish, hot, spicy, a bit of olive oil, some lemon juice, and that will be a lovely salad. That's it for today. We shan't be back here at Longmeadow next week because it's Chelsea, and myself and the whole team will be there. So join us at Chelsea, and then we'll be back here at Longmeadow the week after that. Come on, Nellie. Come on, you come here. You can take this for me. Good girl. No, take the basket. Good girl. Off we go. Come on, Nell. Come on, there's a good girl. Come on. Good girl. What have you got?